Today, I want to talk about an interesting new patent that's been discovered online from Nintendo themselves, but it actually has to do with a very unique control style idea. And if we have one thing to go off of with history around Nintendo and their creative ideas, a lot of it does center around the controller and how you interact with games. And I would also like to preface this conversation by saying patents that are being discovered online and officially filed does not mean that they will ever be utilized in any way, shape, or form in a finalized Nintendo product. But sometimes there is that chance that we do get a look at an official patent that Nintendo does end up using in the future. But for every one of the patents that ultimately make it to market, there's probably 5 that never do. So kind of keep that in mind when we're unpacking all this. And before we do dive into all the details, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here. And with that, guys, I want to hop over to Nash Weedle on Twitter or X, and you might be familiar with this account primarily due to a number of different leaks recently that we've been talking about on the channel, and I'm sure you've seen it covered on other Nintendo focused content creators. This particular post, however, is not just something that they are claiming that they have inside knowledge on or anything like that, but rather it appears that they were browsing through Nintendo's official patent filings and did come across a very interesting controller scheme that I want to talk about the implications of if this does come to market, what it could actually mean, because I think it has a couple really cool use cases, especially as we inch closer and closer to that transition to new next-gen hardware. And you can see the following post over from Nash Weedle, translated, which reads, Leak Express, Nintendo patents touch controls that are incorporated into the screen with responsiveness and tactile sensation of conventional controls thanks to a system of electrodes. Do you think this could be the innovation of Switch 2? Now, there's a detailed description that you could pause the video and read through if you'd like, but the long and short of it is, as you can kind of see the loose outline of the patent that, to be fair, doesn't really exactly show what's going on technology-wise. I mean, I guess it does if you're super technologically inclined and you understand what they're trying to mimic here, but from my understanding and takeaway from Nash Weedle's post and the breakdown of these kind of images we're looking at is that you could essentially use a touch screen but get a tactile responsiveness feeling back from it, meaning as you're dragging your finger across an analog, it actually feels like you're physically moving an analog that you were familiar with on a controller, but you are entirely on a touch screen. And that's a very interesting idea to me, because if you're somebody who's grown up your entire life gaming and you're a full-grown adult now, you probably are super familiar with the traditional analog and button style controls. But to my surprise, nieces and nephews, don't have any kids yet myself, but if you do have kids, you might see your younger generation of children playing on tablets and smartphones with an on-screen controller button layout, like a full-on analog stick and A, B, X, and Y buttons in that traditional controller layout, but it's on the screen. And if I were to try to navigate on those controls myself, I immediately want to set the game down. I have no clue where my thumb is at on the screen. It does not work for me. Maybe it's something that if you grow up with it, it feels a lot more natural, but this would essentially solve for that issue. And while it probably couldn't ever come close to fully mimicking a button input or an analog stick type of feel, it might be able to, with those electrodes, essentially give you that kind of feedback that as you stretch the analog to the end of the circle, that it stiffens up, or something to the effect that lets you know that if you move your thumb any further, you're actually going to go out of the range of where you can push that analog. And so it's more information, more touch input information to go off of for you to be able to have a more immersive experience with touchscreen controls. Now, then the conversation becomes, how could we see Nintendo utilize this? Would this patent actually exist in something like next-gen hardware and the actual touchscreen of the quote-unquote Nintendo Switch 2 or the next-gen successor to the Nintendo console we have today? Will that actually have this use of electrodes and giving you tactile feedback on the touchscreen input? It could, but I think that makes a lot less sense whenever you do have Joy-Cons right there, unless if Nintendo wants to give you the ability to play on just the touchscreen of the tablet and have the Joy-Cons be optional for certain games. I guess there is a world where that play style would be possible, and maybe Nintendo is thinking ahead here and wants to incorporate that via unique gameplay ideas in future games that will come out on their next-gen platform. I, however, believe that maybe there's some world where this patent could fall into something of a touchscreen controller for Nintendo, similar to that of a Pro controller, but you would have a touchscreen touchscreen in the middle. It would be a little bit bigger. I still think that there is a world out there where Nintendo would like to have the dual screen format come back, not as the primary play style, but maybe as an optional play style, and something that if you do own that secondary controller with a screen on it, you might be able to access things like your menu in a game like Zelda Twilight Princess HD that we saw that incredible support for on the Wii U. Same thing with Wind Waker HD. They had the inventory and dungeon maps and everything readily accessible in the Wii U gamepad, which was awesome because you didn't even have to pause the game to get a clear look at where you were going or equip different items. It was a really cool addition to Nintendo style gameplay, and I do wonder if they will ever revisit that in a more technologically advanced type of way. I also think that now, with how small you can make devices, it will make it feel a lot more ergonomic and a lot more holdable, because the Wii U gamepad was honestly massive for what it was. I think you could stretch out a Pro controller just a little bit wider than what it is and throw a screen in the middle of it, kind of like a smartphone with a backbone controller on there. If you've seen that particular product, I'm kind of picturing something the rough size of that, and I think that something like that would be a really cool accessory to have for a next-gen Nintendo console. And this is the big part, it would also solve for the very big question that people ask, which is, when will Nintendo bring Nintendo DS and 3DS to Nintendo Switch Online? And how will they go about doing it? Because obviously those games are heavily touch input focused, and you would have to solve for that if you want to play those games in docked mode. If your Switch is undocked, obviously you could just turn it vertically, and then you would actually be able to play a DS or 3DS game without too much worry of how you're going to remap the controls and touch input and all of that. But when it comes to dock play, all of that goes out the window. So I've always wondered whether or not Nintendo would potentially release a exclusive Nintendo Switch DS or 3DS controller that you have to purchase in order to play those games in docked mode, or if they might do something like a Pro controller that does have a touchscreen on the front of it, and they may just want to level up the technology that is within that Pro controller by allowing you to have that additional level of feedback via these electrodes that would essentially give you that much more immersion when using touchscreen input. But again, this is a patent of a technology, not a finalized project, so we may see Nintendo throw this one out with all of the other patents that have never come to fruition, or we may see them implement this in some way. But that's where I really want to pose the question to you guys. What would you like to see with this patented technology that is now being talked about online? Do you think that there's a chance that Nintendo's planning some kind of super advanced controller with a touchscreen included, and that's how they solve for DS and 3DS on Nintendo Switch Online? And maybe they even have optional functionality in games where your menu system and your maps and your items are all accessible on screen like they were during the Wii U generation and even the DS and 3DS generation? Or do you think Nintendo's planning some weird wacky gimmick with the Switch 2, and it will have touchscreen controls and it won't have Joy-Cons on the side, and this is the solve for that? I definitely don't think that's the case, but Nintendo's Nintendo, so you can never say anything for sure. And finally, let me know if you ever want to see Nintendo go back to that dual screen gameplay idea that we saw during the DS, 3DS, and Wii U generations, or if you think that's a thing of the past and will likely never be revisited now or any point in the future. So regardless of your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Go watch the video on screen next if you haven't already. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.